For this project, I wanted to discuss Plato and his ideas of knowledge, specifically with regards to the divided line in the form of good. So Plato believed that a virtuous person is one who knows the good, and so he wanted to understand how one could truly know good and what good all entails. Before studying how one could understand the good, Plato first questioned how one could know anything at all. And he describes the path to knowledge through his concept of the divided line. The divided line explains the separation between physical and intellectual realms. So within the divided line, on the visible realm, there are two parts, illusion and belief. And illusion involves seeing shadows or reflections within the physical world. And at this point of understanding, one doesn't truly know something, but rather just imagines what they think they're seeing. Belief, moving on, is seeing objects in the physical realm, but not truly understanding the meaning of those objects. So both belief and illusion are merely physical understandings. Crossing over to the invisible and intelligible realm, there are also two parts, and those are mathematical reasoning and forms. And mathematical reasoning includes the understanding of shapes and arithmetic, which are both unseen in the physical realm, but exist solely in the intelligible realm. And then finally, the grasping and understanding of forms occurs once knowledge is reached. And to Plato, understanding the form of something is the ultimate source of knowledge. So Plato explains that all things in this world take on forms, and that when we see an object, we know what that object is based on the form of that object. So if we see a candle, Plato would say that we are really seeing what we know to be the form of a candle. In addition, Plato also says in his one over many theory that objects can take on many different forms. So, for example, a dog might take on the form of having a tail as well as having four legs. However, in our lives, we might encounter a dog that doesn't have a tail. And even though that dog doesn't participate in the form of having a tail, we would still know that that dog is indeed a dog. And this is because the form of being a dog is much deeper than simply common physical characteristics. So to Plato, understanding the form of something is intellectual and not physically visible. In order to understand the form of anything, however, Plato says that we first need to understand the form of good. And the form of good is what gives representation to what the perfect or best form would be. This helps us to grasp what things are. Without the representation of the form of good, we wouldn't have any reasoning behind an idea of what something is. So going back to the example of a dog, if one understands the perfect form of a dog, then they understand what it means to be a dog, intellectually and not physically. And they can therefore recognize a dog even without a tail, in the same way that they could recognize a plant as a plant even without leaves. Plato goes even further to say that the form of good is the light that brings us knowledge and intellectual understanding in this world. And he uses the sun analogy to better explain this topic. And the sun analogy kind of compares eyesight to obtaining knowledge. So Plato explains that the eye is the driving force behind vision. But in addition to that, there's another thing or another source that allows sight to be possible, and this additional thing is sun, or light. And without the sun, one would not be able to see colors of objects or even objects themselves. However, since the sun does shed light on objects, it enables us, or the human eye, to see those objects. And in a very similar way, Plato says that the form of good acts like the sun and sheds light on the human soul, enabling us to see knowledge and truth. So without the higher intellectual understanding in the form of good, we would not have knowledge, but merely belief. The sun allows us to see things in the physical world, and the form of good allows us to grasp and understand things in the intellectual world. In my opinion, Plato has great ideas on how we can interpret knowledge. I think the sun could possibly represent God or a higher power, which would make truth and knowledge possible in the first place. And I think without God, there really wouldn't be any forms at all. But overall, I think the concept of the divided line and the analogy of the sun are both great examples and representations of the path to true understanding and knowledge. If someone only saw simply shadows their whole life, they really wouldn't know what those objects actually looked like and would never know what the objects were until light exposed the truth upon them. And in the same way, things in the intellectual realm can only be understood through reasoning. But in order to gain this understanding, there needs to be first something which reasoning comes from. So to me, knowledge is about concepts and ideas and isn't something that is physically tangible.